train derailments have long posed a significant risk to public safety and environmental health, particularly when they involve hazardous materials. In recent years, these accidents have not only endangered communities, but also sparked national conversations about infrastructure integrity, corporate responsibility, and environmental protection. The derailment in East Palestine, Ohio in 2023 exemplified the catastrophic potential of these incidents. However, it is not an isolated case. From the crude oil fire in Kuster, Washington, to the herbicide spill in Dunsmuir, California, the U.S. has experienced numerous toxic train derailments. These disasters highlight the dire need for regulatory reform and increased investment in rail safety. Today, we'll explore several major derailments to illustrate the dangerous pattern and the lasting damage these events inflict on both human populations and the natural world. On February 3, 2023, a Norfolk Southern freight train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. The derailment involved 38 railcars, 11 of which were carrying dangerous substances such as vinyl chloride, which is a highly flammable and carcinogenic compound used in the production of plastics. In the aftermath, a controlled burn was conducted to prevent an explosion, sending a towering black plume into the sky. Residents who lived in a 1-mile radius were evacuated, but the toxic release scarred the community many miles away. The health consequences of the spill were immediate and severe. Residents reported headaches, rashes, respiratory problems, and nausea. According to the National Center for Biotechnology Information, acute exposure to vinyl chloride can cause dizziness, headaches, respiratory irritation, and central nervous system depression. Chronic exposure is strongly linked to severe conditions such as hepatic angiosarcoma, a rare and aggressive liver cancer, and neurological and cardiovascular effects. Environmental testing revealed contamination in local waterways and soil, prompting fears of long-term health effects ultimately leading to death. Norfolk Southern and the Environmental Protection Agency faced criticism for their delayed and inadequate response. Community members expressed frustration at the lack of transparency and support, especially as cleanup efforts dragged on and new environmental concerns emerged. PBS affiliates interviewed Souza Guinness, who, with her son, lived in East Palestine during the train derailment. She was quoted saying, "It's like walking into bleach, like a closet where half it spilled on the floor and it's been locked up. It hits you like that," she said. Quote, "And my son is up in his bed, coughing, vomiting, like projectile vomiting, shaking. He's gasping for air, begging for water," unquote. Guinness was terrified and could feel something wrong in her body too. She was quoted saying, "You immediately get this film on your mouth and your tongue, just breathing in there. There's something in there and your body's telling you." It was like a huge warning sign. "And he's obviously sick. He wasn't sick before, and I thought it was in my head until within a few minutes. That's all it took. And then I was like, we got to go," unquote. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine was also interviewed, and he pointed to a map, a red circle around the area closest to the derailment site, where Guinness' East Palestine apartment was located. He said, quote, "Those in the red area are facing the grave danger of death," end quote. The medical director of the Pittsburgh Poison Center, Mike Lynch, told area doctors that testing patients' blood for chemicals was not reliable, not clinically useful, and not recommended. He said, quote, "With confidence, you can tell them that there is not a chemical test that they should be seeking, either from you or elsewhere at this time, that can help prove or disprove exposure or would help with diagnosis, treatment, or prognosis from any of these potential exposures," end quote. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention agreed with this advice to healthcare providers to treat patients' symptoms but not pursue testing for chemical exposures. The CDC's Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry did an assessment of chemical exposures called an ACE survey of residents' symptoms after the incident. While they walked around the community knocking on doors, their own agents got sick and had to leave the area. The East Palestine incident underscored not only the vulnerability of small towns situated along major rail routes, but also the systemic failures in managing the transport of hazardous materials and the management of treating those who are exposed. Norfolk Southern in particular is facing criticism for how the event was handled. They could have waited, allowed the railcars to continue to cool down, then work on cleaning up the toxic spill instead of pushing to vent and burn the vinyl chloride. The burn released over 1 million pounds of toxic smoke in the surrounding area. Doing a controlled burn hypothetically prevented a major explosion, but after further analysis, an explosion was not at all likely to occur. Some nearby residents have started to receive personal injury payments as part of the class action settlement, but nearly half of the settlement remains on hold while some appeal for higher compensation and more information about the contamination. The main payments of up to $70,000 per household won't go out until this appeal is settled. Norfolk Southern agreed to a $22 million settlement for the town of East Palestine that includes $13.5 million the railroad has already provided for upgrades to the water treatment plant and to replace police and fire equipment. The railroad is also paying $25 million to upgrade a park in the area. Unfortunately, residents of East Palestine are unsure to what extent they were exposed to these volatile compounds from the original derailment and the subsequent controlled burn. There was little to no testing done on the public, and health officials seemed okay with treating symptoms and not pursuing any chemical exposure tests. Only time will uncover the true extent of the human cost from this terrible accident. While East Palestine captured national attention, it is far from an isolated event. Several other derailments across the U.S. offer chilling parallels and insights into the broader systemic issues at play. In June 2023, a freight train carrying asphalt and molten sulfur plunged into the Yellowstone River in Montana after a bridge collapse. The derailment spilled thousands of gallons of toxic materials into the river, threatening aquatic life and contaminating a vital water source. The response to the Yellowstone spill highlighted the difficulties in managing derailments in remote or ecologically sensitive areas. Cleanup crews faced logistical challenges due to the river's swift currents and the corrosive nature of the spilled materials. Toxic chemicals were carried swiftly downstream, polluting the river for miles. The incident also revealed weaknesses in the structural integrity of aging rail bridges, some of which are ill-equipped to handle the increasing weight and frequency of modern freight trains. In December 2020, a BNSF railway oil train derailed near Kuster, Washington, spilling crude oil and igniting a massive fire. The accident forced evacuations and raised alarms about the safety of transporting volatile substances through residential areas. Investigations revealed that faulty track conditions and poor maintenance likely contributed to the derailment. Although the environmental impact was less severe than other incidents due to the fire consuming much of the oil, the event still posed serious risks to local ecosystems and public health. It also reignited debates about the transport of fossil fuels by rail, especially as pipelines face increasing public resistance. One of the most alarming derailments of the past few decades occurred in 2012 in Paulsboro, New Jersey, when a Conrail train derailed on a swing bridge over Mantua Creek. Several tankers carrying vinyl chloride fell into the waterway, releasing toxic gas into the surrounding area. More than 250 people were exposed to the chemical, leading to acute health symptoms and long-term fears about chronic illness. The National Transportation Safety Board found that the bridge had a known history of mechanical failures and that Conrail had failed to properly inspect and maintain it. The emergency response was chaotic, marked by miscommunication and delays, further endangering residents. In what remains one of the worst environmental train disasters in U.S. history, a Southern Pacific train derailed in 1991 near Dunsmuir, California, spilling over 19,000 gallons of the herbicide metam into the Sacramento River. The toxic cloud and chemical runoff killed every living organism in a 40-mile stretch of the river, including fish, plants, and insects. The ecological devastation was immediate and profound. The river ecosystem, once teeming with life, was left sterile. Recreational and commercial activities in the area ground to a halt, and the cleanup took years. This event prompted legislative changes in California regarding hazardous material transport, but similar reforms were slow to take hold on a national scale. The Dunsmuir disaster stands as a stark reminder of the environmental stakes involved in chemical transport by rail. Unlike other industrial accidents that may be confined to specific sites, derailments involving water contamination can ripple out for miles, affecting ecosystems, communities, and economies for decades. Across these incidents, several troubling patterns emerge. First, aging infrastructure and insufficient maintenance are recurring culprits. Many bridges, tracks, and railcars are decades old and not designed to handle the current volume or type of hazardous materials being transported. Second, regulatory oversight is often reactive rather than proactive. Agencies like the Federal Railroad Administration and the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration lack the staffing and authority to enforce comprehensive safety measures. Industry self-reporting and lobbying further weaken regulatory frameworks, allowing companies to skirt responsibility until after disasters occur. Third, emergency preparedness is frequently inadequate. Local fire departments and first responders are often ill-equipped to handle chemical spills, particularly in rural or underfunded regions. Evacuation plans, public communication strategies, and medical response capabilities lag behind the growing threat posed by these derailments. The fallout from toxic train derailments extends far beyond the immediate impact zone. Chemicals like vinyl chloride, sulfur dioxide, and metam pose long-term risks to human health, including reproductive problems, respiratory issues, and various deadly cancers. These effects may take years to surface, complicating diagnosis and treatment. Environmental consequences are equally dire. Rivers, lakes, and soil contaminated by chemical spills can become ecological dead zones. Wildlife is often the first to suffer, but the damage rarely stops there. Polluted water supplies can affect agriculture, fisheries, and drinking water, creating a cascade of secondary effects that harm human livelihoods. From East Palestine to Dunsmuir, these incidents show the devastating consequences of neglect, corporate indifference, and insufficient oversight. The chemical trails left behind are more than environmental stains. They represent a broken promise to safeguard public health and preserve natural ecosystems. The question is not if another toxic derailment will happen, but when. And with each new spill, more lives, landscapes, and futures are put at risk.